Have you ever wondered what happens when a woman is pushed too far? What happens when the quiet partner behind a billionaire's throne decides to claim the kingdom for herself? Stay tuned, because this isn't just a story of betrayal. It's the story of a queen taking back her crown at 40,000 feet. The soft hum of a Gulfstream G650ER's twin Rolls-Royce engines was the sound of absolute power for billionaire Richard Vance. It was the soundtrack to a perfect betrayal, a secret flight that would take him to a remote private island in the Bahamas with his young, dazzling mistress, Sophia. But some secrets, like betrayals, have a habit of taking on a life of their own. The black limousine slid with a reverent silence through the private gates of Teterboro Airport, a gesture of deference reserved only for royalty or immense wealth. Inside, 50-year-old Richard adjusted the cuff of his bespoke Brioni suit. Beside him, 28-year-old Sophia was the picture of vibrant youth. Her scarlet dress was a bold slash of color against the car's monochromatic luxury interior, a shout of passion in contained sophistication. Sophia's laugh, a crystalline sound he had found intoxicating for the last 6 months, filled the space. She ran a perfectly manicured hand through her platinum blonde hair, a gesture that was both nervous and theatrical. The Gulfstream G650ER, registered as NRCH1, was his pride and joy, a $65 million testament to his dominance in the world of green technology and aggressive corporate takeovers. "Get used to it, darling," Richard murmured, his voice a low, deep rumble. He placed a hand on her knee, his thumb drawing slow, possessive circles. The words tasted of honey and power on his tongue. He had built this world from nothing. She was 7 months pregnant, expecting their first child, a boy. Do you think Richard felt genuine remorse, or had power completely clouded his conscience? Isabella was brilliant, poised, and the solid foundation on which he had built his success. But she had become predictable. He was simply Richard Vance, master of the universe. A uniformed flight attendant, a kind-faced woman named Lucy, greeted them with a practiced smile. Richard nodded curtly, a hand on Sophia's lower back, guiding her up the stairs. The interior was his sanctuary, a bespoke space of cream leather, polished mahogany, and brushed chrome. "Champagne," he offered, gesturing to the crystal flutes already waiting in a silver bucket. She kicked off her Christian Louboutin heels and wiggled her toes, a picture of carefree indulgence. As he popped the Dom Perignon, the sound resonated softly in the cabin, and he allowed himself a moment of pure, unadulterated triumph. The private resort island was a neutral, luxurious ground for the final handshake. Taking Sophia was a reckless indulgence, a victory lap before the race was officially won. He raised his own glass. The jet's doors sealed shut with a pneumatic hiss, shutting out the world. The engines spooled up, their low were escalating to a powerful roar. The flight plan was set. And the woman beside him was beautiful and compliant. He felt like Icarus. But he had built his wings from carbon fiber and titanium, and he had no intention of flying too close to the sun. Below, the lights of the city spread out like a carpet of scattered diamonds. Richard took a sip of his champagne. It was perfect. Everything was utterly and impeccably perfect. Below, a thick blanket of clouds obscured the land, creating the illusion that they were utterly alone, suspended in a private universe of mahogany and champagne. It was a performance he had perfected over the years, and she was the perfect audience. And that, he concluded, allowing a small, self-satisfied smile to play on his lips, is how I ended up owning the patent on the entire line of hydrocells. "You're such a shark, Richie," Sophia said, her voice breathy. She leaned over the console separating them, intending to kiss him. It was at that precise moment that a soft, feminine voice cut through the quiet hum of the cabin. "He certainly is, though I always thought of him as more of a wolf." Sophia recoiled, her face a mask of confusion. He and Sophia were in the forward seating area. Farther back, past the galley, was a more private stateroom. From the shadows of this rear section, a figure emerged. She was dressed in a simple but elegant cream cashmere tunic and matching pants that fell gracefully over her 7-month baby bump. It was an architectural beauty, rooted in the fine structure of her bones and the intelligence of her clear gray eyes. And it was those eyes that were fixed on him now with a gaze that was not one of rage, not of hysteria, but of something far more terrifying. "Isabella," Richard mouthed, his voice a choked whisper. "What? How are you here? How are you here?" Sophia blurted out, her mouth agape. The color had drained from her face, leaving her looking garish and cheap in her scarlet dress. She looked from Richard's horrified expression to the serene pregnant woman who had appeared as if by magic. "I thought you were off to Zurich for a banking conference. It appears the pilot has taken a rather significant detour." The cabin, once a cocoon of illicit pleasure, instantly became a high-altitude pressure cooker. How did she know? A meeting with Sterling. He moved it. Alistair Sterling. Isabella's eyebrow rose slightly. She finally allowed her gaze to flick over to Sophia, a swift, dismissive scan that took in the too bright dress, the shocked expression, the aura of being completely out of place. "Isabella, please," Richard began, his voice low and urgent. "This is not the time or the place." "On the contrary, Richard," she replied, her voice losing none of its glacial calm. "I can't think of a more perfect place. At 40,000 feet, with nowhere to run, no meetings to rush to, no calls to take, no lawyers to hide behind. Just us. A captive audience." Lucy, the flight attendant, appeared at that moment, her face a carefully blank mask. "Would you like anything, Mrs. Vance? Perhaps a little chamomile tea?" "That would be lovely, Lucy." "Thank you," Isabella said with a small, elegant smile. The casual exchange was a dagger to Richard's gut. The crew knew. They were her accomplices. He looked at the cockpit door, feeling a surge of impotent rage. His pilot, Robert, had been with him for over a decade. He had been betrayed by his own staff. Isabella's gaze returned to him, her expression unreadable. "It appears you're operating under a misapprehension, Richard. You think of this as your jet. I don't need permission to board it. I just need to make a call." The floor opened up for a second time for him, a psychological plunge far more jarring than the jet's initial ascent. The asset restructuring, of course. He had barely paid attention, signing the documents she put in front of him, trusting her implicitly. The irony was a bitter pill. He was trapped, caught in a multi-million-dollar prison of his own making, with his pregnant wife as his jailer and his mistress as his cellmate. The flight to paradise had just become a slow, agonizing descent into hell. Isabella cradled it in her hands, her movements serene and unhurried. The contrast between her composure and the frantic chaos in Richard's mind was dizzying. His thoughts raced, cycling through denial, rage, and a creeping sense of dread. He was a man accustomed to controlling every variable, to manipulating every system. He looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time in months. And for a fleeting, painful moment, he was transported back to the past. He remembered their beginnings. They had met at a charity event long before the name Vance Holdings meant anything. He was a brash engineer with a revolutionary idea and a failing startup. She was the daughter of a banking tycoon, a fresh-faced college graduate who saw past his threadbare suit and into the core of his ambition. He remembered the thrill of their shared purpose, the electricity of building something together. Their marriage wasn't just a union of hearts, it was the merger of two formidable forces. When had that changed? As the company grew, so did his ego. The more the world revered him as a solitary genius, the more he began to believe it. Her advice became an annoyance. Her caution became pessimism. He had started to feel confined. She demanded nothing of his mind, only of his wallet and his attention. She was a reflection, not a partner, a soft, flattering mirror that showed him the powerful, unattached man he wanted to be. "I imagine you have questions," Isabella said, her voice pulling him from his reverie. She took a delicate sip of her tea, her eyes never leaving his. Before Richard could answer, Sophia, who had been unervingly silent, finally found her voice. "Who do you think you are?" she spat, directing her words at Isabella. "I am his wife," Isabella interjected, her tone as sharp and cold as breaking ice. She still didn't look directly at Sophia, addressing her as one might address a bothersome insect. Sophia blanched, her bravado crumbling to dust. She was not a player in this game, she was the board itself, something to be wiped clean. She opened her mouth to speak again, then snapped it shut, looking at Richard with pleading eyes, begging him to intervene, to defend her. But Richard was paralyzed. He chose a third option, evasion. "Isabella, this is a business trip. My relationship with Ms. Beltran is professional. A professional relationship that requires a 10-hour flight to a private resort in the Bahamas and a scarlet dress," she retorted, her voice dry. "Is she taking notes, Richard? Or is her role more hands-on?" The barely veiled vulgarity was so uncharacteristic of her that it left him stunned. The Isabella he knew was above such things, always maintaining a veneer of perfect propriety. This was a new Isabella, one who had shed her customary self-control. "I know everything." He thought of all the clandestine dinners, the whispered phone calls, the carefully constructed alibis. It was not the patience of a victim, it was the patience of a hunter. He had forgotten the mind as sharp as a razor that had helped him dissect competitors and navigate hostile takeovers. He had forgotten the woman who could command a boardroom with a quiet word, who could see 3 moves ahead while everyone else was still focused on the first play. He had forgotten that the person who helped you build an empire knows exactly where all the load-bearing walls are and exactly how to make the whole thing come crashing down. The jet leveled out. The seatbelt sign clicked off. But the oppressive tension in the cabin only intensified. He was a guest, a defendant in a trial being held at cruising altitude. He needed to regain control, to steer the conversation back to familiar territory. That was his ground. "You mentioned Alastair Sterling," he said, forcing a semblance of his usual boardroom tone. He was trying to reframe the situation, to position himself as the guardian of their shared legacy, implying her actions were emotional and reckless. "Project Vanguard," she said, naming the top-secret merger. "Yes, I'm intimately familiar with it," she paused, letting the statement hang in the air. It would, in effect, dilute the power of the existing board members, including the seat held by Isabella's family trust, completely marginalizing her influence. It was a power grab, a final move to make the empire truly his and his alone. Only his personal lawyer and his most trusted CFO knew the details. "You have a CFO, Richard. I have a family office that has been managing billions for 3 generations. I believe the clause in question was Section 11, subsection C, the one that reassigns preferred shareholder voting rights in the event of a leadership restructuring. A clever, if somewhat transparent, attempt to gut my position post-merger. You planned to divorce me after the deal was signed, didn't you?" It wasn't a question, it was a statement of fact. Every word was a perfectly aimed dart that pierced his defenses. He had no response. He had been so consumed by his own cleverness, so sure of his intellectual superiority, that he never imagined she would be watching. He had been playing checkers while she had been playing 3-dimensional chess. He's a notorious recluse, an old-school titan. He's famous for being protective of his family name and his legacy. He once ruined a $1 billion deal because he discovered the other company's CEO was having an affair with his son's wife. She let that information settle in the silent cabin. Richard felt a wave of nausea. "And then I told him I was afraid I couldn't attend the celebration dinner he was hosting on the island, because my husband's +1 had created a scheduling conflict. The deal was dead. The meeting with Sterling wasn't a signing, it was going to be his execution. You wouldn't. You've just torpedoed the value of your own shares, our future, everything." "My future is secure, Richard," and so is my son's, she corrected him gently. So I made Alistair a counter-proposal. She leaned in slightly, her grey eyes burning with an intensity he hadn't seen in years. It was the look she used to have when they were on the verge of a breakthrough, the look that told him she saw the way forward when he only saw roadblocks. A proposal, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, for a partnership. One that removes the compromised, unreliable, and morally bankrupt element from the equation. One that puts me, as the majority shareholder of the Vance Family Trust, in charge as interim CEO to oversee the merger. The cabin tilted. The world had just been remade, and he was no longer at its center. He stared at her, at this woman he thought he knew, at this woman he had dismissed as a quiet, domestic creature. She hadn't just exposed his affair. She hadn't just ruined his deal. She had stolen his company, his legacy, his future, all while smiling politely and sipping chamomile tea. The shark had been outmaneuvered. The wolf had been caught in a trap of his own making, and he was still 30,000 feet off the ground. The story of Richard and Isabella teaches us a brutal lesson about arrogance and underestimation. What would you have done in Isabella's place? Do you think it was revenge or an act of survival? Let me know your opinion in the comments. The affair, the secret clause, his trip to the Bahamas, she thought they were his secret plays, but they were nothing more than the predictable moves of a pawn that she had been tracking on the board. Interim CEO, he finally managed to say, the words tasting like ash. Loyalty is a transactional commodity, Richard. You of all people should know that. Your loyalty to the board was conditional on your ability to deliver profit and power. By attempting to disenfranchise them with your secret term sheet, you invalidated that contract. As for their loyalty to you personally, I wonder. I sent a copy of that term sheet, along with a summary of my conversation with Sterling, to every single board member an hour ago. I suspect their loyalty is currently undergoing a rather rapid recalculation. He felt his world constrict, the walls of the luxurious cabin closing in. He searched for an angle, a weakness, any leverage at all. It was Sophia who broke the spell. Her fear had finally curdled into desperate, resentful rage. She was no longer a pawn, she was a victim, and she knew it. This is what you do, isn't it? She shrieked, her voice shrill. You sit back and play the long-suffering saint while you plot to ruin him. You're pathetic. Her words, meant to rouse him, had the opposite effect. They sounded hollow and foolish, the comprehension of a war whose scale she couldn't possibly grasp. Richard didn't even look at her. Why? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Is this all about the affair? Revenge, Isabella? Isabella's gaze softened for the first time, a flash of the woman he once knew shining through the icy facade. After all these years, you think this is about her? She gestured vaguely in Sophia's direction without looking at her. She is a symptom, not the disease. For months, I've watched you. I've watched you lie to me, your partner, the woman carrying your child. Then I found you were also lying to our board, the people who entrusted you with their fortunes. And through it all, you were lying to yourself, pretending you were still the hero of your own story. A wolf. A wolf who eventually eats his own pack to survive. I couldn't let you poison our son's legacy before he was even born. Her words weren't accusatory. They were a diagnosis, delivered with the calm, detached authority of a doctor giving a terminal prognosis. He had no defense, because she was right. His arrogance had become a cancer that was metastasizing to every part of his life, and she was performing a radical, painful surgery to save the larger organism. What you've done is corporate espionage, he said weakly, grabbing onto one last legal life raft. Is it illegal? She countered. As a co-owner of this jet, I have the right to be on it. As a board member and major shareholder, I have the right to communicate with other board members on company matters. I have been very, very careful, Richard. Every sentence was another slamming door. The polished wood, the soft leather, the silent hum of the engine set all felt like a mockery now. "Get her a drink," he murmured to the empty air, not caring if the flight attendant heard. He couldn't look at her anymore. "From this moment on, Richard, you are no longer in a position to give orders on this plane, or anywhere else." The full weight of his new reality settled on him. He was losing his identity. In his place, there was just a man, a cheater, a failure, trapped in a metal tube, flying through the stratosphere with the two women who represented the ruin of his past and the desolation of his future. When the jet doors opened, Alistair Sterling's security team was waiting. They were not there to greet Richard, but to escort him off the island, per Mr. Sterling's explicit instructions. Sophia, in her now wrinkled scarlet dress, vanished into a waiting taxi, a footnote in a story that was never about her. 2 months after the flight, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy, whom she named Leo. He became the center of her world, the true legacy she had fought to protect. Years later, Isabella stood on the balcony of her office, which overlooked a city now powered by the clean technology she had championed. It was about building a better world, proving that true strength isn't in dominance, but in creation, integrity, and the fierce, unwavering love for the future. She had not just saved a company, she had forged an empire of her own, built not on lies, but on a foundation of unbreakable will. Isabella's journey from a betrayed wife to a visionary leader shows the incredible power of resilience and intelligence. Her story is one of building a better future from the ashes of the past. You won't want to miss what we have in store.